A body can look completely intact and still be dead. The face is there. The hands are there, still curled the way they always curled. The clothes still fit. Nothing is missing. You could set that body in a chair at the dinner table, and for one strange second, it might almost pass. And yet everyone in the room knows the difference immediately, without being told, without checking a pulse. Something that was there is gone. The shape remains. The life doesn't. James, writing to a scattered and struggling church, reaches for that exact image to describe something that should unsettle anyone who assumes their faith is safe simply because it's sincere. As the body without the spirit is dead, he writes, so faith without works is dead also. And the word he chooses for dead is not vague. In the Greek, it's nekros. It doesn't mean imaginary. It doesn't mean fake. A corpse is not a hoax. It's the real body of a real person who is genuinely, fully gone. Nekros describes something that once had life and no longer does, not something that was never alive to begin with. That distinction changes the entire question this passage is asking. James is not accusing his readers of faking their faith. He's asking something worse. He's asking whether the faith they're carrying around still has breath in it, or whether they've been treating a corpse like a living thing for so long they've stopped noticing the difference. Here's where it gets strange, though, because most people who quote, "faith without works is dead," have never asked who James was actually writing to, or why he needed to say it in the first place. He was writing to people who had lost their homes. After Stephen was stoned in Jerusalem, a wave of persecution broke out against the early Jewish believers, and they scattered into Judea, into Samaria, into Phoenicia, into cities where they had no standing, no land, and often no income. James addresses his letter to the 12 tribes in the dispersion, a phrase his readers would not have heard as poetry. They were displaced people, living out of what they could carry. Some were day laborers. Some were being cheated out of wages by wealthier believers sitting in the very same congregation. James says as much later in the letter, when he turns his anger on landowners who withhold pay from the workers in their fields. This letter was not written in a seminar room. It was written to refugees who were also, in some cases, being exploited by their own church. Most scholars place this letter in the early 40s AD, which would make it one of the very first pieces of writing in the entire New Testament, older than most of Paul's letters, written while the memory of the resurrection was still within living reach for the people reading it. And the man writing it wasn't a distant theologian. Tradition holds that James was Jesus' own brother, the one who led the Jerusalem church after the ascension. He watched his brother's followers get scattered by violence. He knew exactly what it cost some of these people just to still be Christians at all. When he picks up a pen to talk about dead faith, he is not lecturing from a safe distance. That's the room James chapter 2 walks into. If a brother or sister is without clothing and in need of daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, be warmed and filled," without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? James asks. And notice, he doesn't say the person who says this has bad theology. He doesn't accuse them of lying. He says their faith, alone, without action, is dead. Nekros, a corpse wearing the language of compassion, with none of the breath. This is not an abstract illustration for James. It's Tuesday afternoon. It's someone in his own congregation, cold, and someone else offering warm words instead of a coat. And just before this, James gives us one more word worth pausing on. He calls the person who thinks faith alone is enough, without action, kenos, empty. Not stupid, empty. Hollow the way a jar is hollow, shaped exactly like something that should be full, holding nothing. But here's the part that should actually unsettle you if you grew up in an American church, because there's a very good chance you've been taught to be quietly suspicious of this exact verse. Martin Luther, the man who lit the fuse of the Reformation, once called the Book of James an epistle of straw. He reportedly said, in a fit of exasperation, that he almost wanted to throw Jimmy into the stove. Why? Because Luther had built his entire theological framework on one phrase, justified by faith alone, and James, on the surface, appears to say the opposite. James actually writes, in verse 24, "You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone." To a Reformation-trained ear, raised on 500 years of that phrase, that sentence sounds like a direct contradiction of the gospel itself. So, which is it? Faith alone or faith plus works? This is where the original language does something most English translations can't. The word justified, dikaioo, is being used by two different writers in two different arguments, aimed at two different audiences. Paul, writing to churches wrestling with whether they needed to earn God's approval by keeping the Jewish law, uses dikaioo to mean being declared righteous. A legal verdict, handed down by God, received by faith and nothing else, with no ledger of good deeds required to enter the courtroom. James, writing to people who claimed belief but withheld compassion, uses dikaioo to mean being shown righteous, proven, demonstrated, made visible in front of other people. Paul is answering the question, how does a person get right with God? James is answering a completely different question. How would anyone, including you, know if it actually happened? One is about the verdict. The other is about the evidence. They were never fighting each other. They were answering different questions the whole time, using the same courtroom word to describe two different moments in that courtroom, and it took the church centuries to fully sort that out, mostly because one reformer was reading one word as if it could only mean one thing. If this is starting to reframe something you thought you already understood, if you're seeing James chapter 2 differently than you were 10 minutes ago, this is a good moment to subscribe to Plain and Simple, drop a comment with the word that's sticking with you the most, and share this with someone who's been carrying a version of this question without quite knowing how to ask it. That's genuinely how more people find this channel. Now, James does something interesting. He doesn't just define dead faith and walk away, he shows you what breathing faith actually looks like, and he picks the two most unlikely people in the entire Hebrew Bible to prove his point. The first is Abraham. Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered Isaac his son on the altar? James asks, and here the Greek gives you two more words worth sitting with. The first is sunergeo, faith working together with the act. Not faith replaced by action, the way some readers assume James is arguing. Faith partnered with it, like two hands doing one motion, neither one able to finish the job alone. The second word is dikaioo, faith completed, or brought to full maturity, by what Abraham did on that mountain. Dikaioo doesn't mean faith became real that day, as if it hadn't been real before. It means faith became whole. It reached the shape it was always meant to take. Abraham believed God for decades before Isaac was ever born. Genesis makes that plain, chapters earlier, long before there was a mountain or a knife involved. But on that mountain, belief stopped being a private conviction held quietly in one man's chest and became a visible, costly, physical act that anyone watching could see. The faith didn't start there. It finally exhaled there. And then James adds something almost easy to miss if you're moving quickly. Because of what Abraham did, Scripture calls him a friend of God, not a servant, not a follower, a friend. That exact title shows up again in only a couple of other places across the Hebrew Scriptures, in Isaiah, in the Chronicles, And each time it describes the same thing: someone whose relationship with God had moved from belief into intimacy, because belief had grown legs and walked somewhere. So Abraham is proof. But Abraham is also, in a way, the easy example, the founding patriarch, the man God made covenant promises to by name, centuries before any of James's readers were born. Every Jewish reader of this letter already trusted Abraham. Nobody in that scattered congregation needed convincing that the father of their nation had real faith. James could have stopped there and made his point safely, without ruffling a single feather. Instead, he reaches for someone almost designed to make his readers uncomfortable: Rahab, a Canaanite, a prostitute, a woman with no covenant history, no bloodline claim to the promises of Israel, living inside the walls of a city standing under God's judgment. And when the Israelite spies come into Jericho, she hides them on her roof, lies to the king's men to protect them, and sends them out by a different route than the one they came in on. James writes, "Was not even Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out another way?" Look at what James just did. He put a patriarch and a prostitute side by side, in the same argument, as proof of the exact same thing. Not the same pedigree, not the same reputation, not even the same starting point with God. Abraham had generations of covenant history behind him. Rahab had none. The same breath, though, two people who could not be further apart on paper, standing as the two examples James chooses for what living faith actually looks like when it finally moves. That's not an accident. That's the whole point. James isn't telling you that the right kind of people have real faith. He's telling you that real faith reveals itself the same way in anyone who actually has it: by moving, by costing something, by showing up in the body, whether that body belongs to a patriarch standing over an altar on a mountain or a woman risking her own life for strangers inside a condemned city. And James isn't finished making that point uncomfortable. Just a few verses earlier, before he ever gets to Abraham or Rahab, he brings up one more group entirely, the last group you'd expect in an argument about faith. "You believe that God is one," James says. "You do well. Even the demons believe and shudder." Read that again. The demons have correct theology. They are not confused about who God is. Their doctrine is accurate, and it does nothing for them except make them tremble. There's a word underneath this that's easy to walk past. The Greek verb James uses for the demon's belief is pisteuo, the verb form of the same noun, pistis, that gets translated faith everywhere else in this passage. On paper, the demons have pistis. They believe the correct proposition about God, and they believe it completely. Enough to shudder, which is more visible conviction than a lot of people sitting in a pew on a Sunday morning manage to feel. But pistis was never meant to describe a fact sitting quietly in someone's head. In its fuller sense, the word carries the idea of trust, of leaning your weight onto something, of reliance. The demons believe the fact. They do not trust the person behind it. They know exactly who God is, and that knowledge doesn't move them toward Him. It moves them away, shuddering. Correct belief, sitting perfectly still, doing nothing, changing nothing, is not the same thing as a living thing. If demons can hold the right belief and still be demons, then holding the right belief was never going to be the finish line James is aiming at. So come back to the image James started with. A body without breath is not a fake body. It's a real body that has simply stopped receiving life. And a faith without works is not a fake faith. It might be sincere. It might be orthodox down to the last doctrine. It might say all the right words about who God is, in all the right order, with real conviction behind them. It might shudder in the dark like something that knows exactly who it's dealing with, and still never move. The question James is actually asking you tonight isn't, do you believe the right things? It's a harder question than that. It's this: is there breath moving through what you believe? Or have you been carrying something that still has the shape of faith and quietly calling it alive? You don't have to build an ark or carry a son up a mountain to answer that question honestly. You just have to notice the next moment your faith is asked to move. A coat someone actually needs, a wrong that needs naming out loud, a person standing in front of you who is cold and waiting to see what you'll do about it, and see whether something in you exhales or whether the shape just sits there, still and formed and silent, looking exactly like faith from the outside. Picture that same room James was writing to. Someone walks in from the cold, and two people in the pews notice at the same moment. One of them says the kind thing, "Go in peace, stay warm," and means it, feels the warmth of having said it, and sits back down. The other one gets up. Neither one is lying. Neither one is faking belief, but only one of them just breathed. That's the whole distance James is asking you to see. Not the distance between faith and no faith, but the distance between a shape and a life, standing right next to each other in the very same room, dressed almost identically. If this reached you tonight, help it reach someone else. Subscribe to Plain and Simple. Leave a comment, even one word. Share this with someone who's been carrying a question they haven't known how to ask. That is genuinely how more people find this channel. Keep us in your prayers. God bless you.